Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Vuori. I have an unhealthy amount of joggers, but Vuori's performance joggers take the cake as the softest, most comfortable pants that I never want to take off. Check out the description below for 20% off of your first purchase. On today's show, we have Brian Friend and James Hobart here to discuss if these are the fittest men and women who have qualified for the CrossFit Games. Now, before we get into that specific question, James, I want to start with you. Looking at the season structure and the way that the programming advances through each stage, do you think that this is the best structure of season to narrow down a field to advance these athletes to the games?
Oh, I think it's a really good structure, and I'll add a little color on this just to say that like I really preferred the structure where the region or the semifinals or regionals were standardized, and in terms of that like specific structure. And the reason I like that is because I like the nerdy side of it, of being able to compare everyone post regionals across like a cross regional ranking, even though there's still some differences if you're not doing even the same workout against the same people in the same place. Obviously, the games is the best platform for that. But I really like the direction they're headed in. I like that CrossFit, and everyone knows I'm biased. I like that CrossFit is providing at least two workouts to standardize across events. I think that's a really good idea. And to me, it seems like, especially compared to last year, that the semifinal event programmers are taking more time to consider feedback and push to make more well-rounded events. And the events that are the most well-rounded, I think, will continually provide the fittest athletes to show up at the games. So yeah, I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. Although I kind of have a nostalgia for the old format for the reasons I mentioned, and I don't think I'm the only one in that camp. But sometimes things have to change.
Brian, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the season format is, it's an important topic for us to talk about because it's had so many iterations in recent history after being fairly consistent for a similar amount of time through the mid-teens, 20 teens. But in this current format, I don't think that the goal is to find the fittest 40 and get them to the games. There's also a component of this structure that is very much inclusive in a global sense, where there still wants, CrossFit wants to have representatives from different parts of the world. And the expense of that is that you will miss out on athletes that I think could drastically outperform some of those athletes at a game setting.
Can you give us some examples? Like, I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I did a study a couple months ago with Tyler Watkins where we basically just did an analysis of how athletes from different parts of the world have performed at the games over the past couple years. It's still hard to do that because 2020 and 2019 were so different from anything else that we've seen. But the idea of that was to have the performance by continent, which is how we're currently sorting athletes, dictate the number of spots that they get in future years at the games. So if you're in a continent that historically has low representation, we'll just take Africa, for example. They get one spot right now. But the Africa qualifier does very well at the games, that performance has the opportunity to potentially open up another spot for Africa in the next year. And at the same token, if the representative from Africa finishes last, that they would lose that guaranteed spot for the games. But what they would never lose is the opportunity to get in through either a wild card or a last chance qualifier type scenario. And that therefore, as different parts of the world are catching up based on performance at the games, their performance can open up new opportunities for younger athletes in their continent. I think that would be hugely beneficial in the case of women in Australia or Oceania, for example, because Tia and Cara and Jamie have done so well over the last 5 years when they've been able to compete healthy at the games, that they would certainly have opened up new spots for younger athletes. And you wouldn't have had the situation this year where someone like a Maddie Sturt or a Laura Clifton, or a Marnie Sykes or a Madeline Schelling, who people don't even necessarily know that much about, feel like they had no chance there because, Tia and Cara took a combined, Tia took 100% of the available points. Cara took 97% of the remaining available points. So you have everyone else in that region fighting for one spot, and it's a really hard spot to get. But I think that their performance has warranted more spots in recent history. And I am hopeful that there will be an opportunity for performance to help dictate game spots moving forward.
James, do you have any insight to whether that is the direction that CrossFit could move towards to base spots on performance?
I don't particularly work too much with the games team. I hear some things here and there, so I don't think I have any definite insight. So for me, you might just get some hearsay and speculation. I think historically, one of the biggest things I know the games team has tried to do is balance this test to find the fittest athlete with promoting the growth of the sport and just the growth of CrossFit, via affiliates and CrossFitters worldwide. And a big part of that, as Brian outlined, has to do with the fact of still leaving spots open for qualifiers from countries or regions of the world where CrossFit might not be as tenured or have as much growth as somewhere like in the United States or what we're seeing happen down in South America. So I would say that I'm sure it's something that's on their radar and constantly thinking about. Again, probably one of the reasons you see semifinals that don't have standardized setups or aren't in like these exact specific same places every year, while they've tried to grow the amount of semifinals to try and nurture things like that.
When we look at the season thus far, we look at, Brian mentioned the way that it was inclusive during the Open, then quarterfinals, semifinals, last chance qualifier, and now the games. Brian, I'll start with you. Were there any movements or styles of programming or patterns that you think were left out that really could have qualified somebody else that you think deserves to be at the games, if that makes sense?
Well, I think very little was left out if you look at the totality of semifinal programming, but there was no consistency across the semifinal programming. So some people had to exhibit high volume of gymnastic skills, specifically with a ring muscle up or a very difficult version of a handstand push-up, and others had no ring muscle ups or no handstand push-ups in sight of any kind. So across the total spectrum of semifinals, which is ultimately the qualifying stage for the games, we got a little bit of everything, but not everyone necessarily had a chance to touch on all those things.
James, would you like to see it go back to everybody gets the same programming at the semifinals? I know that there's pushback with that because CrossFit wants to give semifinals creativity to do what they want, but do you think that it would be better for the sport?
I think it would be a lot easier for us to make comparisons across athletes and talk about things like this. I don't think it necessarily is needed to, as Brian mentioned, nurture the growth of the sport outside of somewhere like a US where there's already a dominant contingent of athletes or even parts of Europe who have been doing this for a very long time. Personally, I just like it. I really like it from the comparison aspect. Maybe years down the road, as you see CrossFit experiencing larger growth, maybe in some regions where it's not as popular or not as saturated as it is now, going back to that format would actually be better if you have more sites that can host, the same competitions across the entire globe. That certainly would make it easier. I don't think it's a necessary component for right now. The other option would be to increase the amount of the online competition portion throughout the season. But after this year, I think as far as the vocal minority maybe or majority, I don't know if that's the direction the community would want to head in.
So ultimately, do you think that these are the 40 fittest men and women?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's the 40 fittest men and women who are tested. I do think Brian raises a really good point where in somewhere like Australia, like with Madeline Sturt and a few other athletes down there. Because if you have, the dominant athletes like Kara and you have Tia down there, I won't say those spots are guaranteed. Anything can happen on any given Sunday, but it's a really good case to maybe push for more spots open down in somewhere like Australia. So. Yeah.
Brian, what are your thoughts? Are these the 40 fittest men and women?
No, absolutely not, and not even close. And it's
not even close.
No, I don't think so. And I think that that's not necessarily a problem. Like you just have to understand the format and what we're trying to do. And so CrossFit has made it clear by the way that they have outlined this format that they are not considering certain things in the distribution of game spots. And actually, the last chance qualifier is an amazing opportunity for us to see that play out. we've got the next 3 fittest from every semifinal who had the opportunity to sign up for the last chance qualifier. 25% of them chose not to sign up for whatever reason. So it's not a perfect study. But of the ones that did on the men's side, you just have to look. You can just scroll through the leaderboard one time, and you'll see that with the exception of Matt DeLugos, who had an injury and had to withdraw, that 10 of the top 16 finishers were North American men. And I've said over and over again that, one of the things that I think CrossFit is stuck in right now is that they feel like they have to give the same number of spots to the men and women in every part of the world, when based on competition, that has not been earned. The North American men are still the guys to beat. And I'm very confident that I could hand select 6 to 10 men from North America, insert them into the games field, and none of those 10 guys would finish 40 through 50 if there were 50 spots there. But on the women's side, if you flip over there, you'll see that there's because they still don't get the same number of spots, right? Australia only has 3, or Oceania only has 3, and only 2 of them signed up, but they both finished in the top 8. All of the women that participated from Europe finished in the top 12, and then the remaining ones were from North America. But in both cases, men and women in the last chance qualifier, you go to the bottom and you're going to see the representatives from Africa, Asia, and South America sprinkled in the bottom 10. Basically, all of them are in the bottom 10. And so that's a good opportunity for us to see in a very specific and narrow focus, which is just the athletes that barely missed out on the games. How are they comparing against each other? Yes, it's only 4 workouts. Yes, it's online, but there's still a lot that can be gleaned from that. And I'm pretty confident that the carryover in the games field will reflect that similarly. The reason I can say that is because I've done a study of it over the past 5 years, and that's how it is year in and year out. Now, there are little deviations, and sometimes Cara had to withdraw from the games last year. So the women representation at the games doesn't look as strong that year as in a year where she can compete healthy all the way to the end. Obviously, 2019 and 20 caused these big ripples in terms of that study. But now we're getting into more of a rhythm where we'll see, we had last year, we'll have this year. And after one more year, I think we can definitely start to see the trend. And that will be that, the women in Europe and Oceania are performing really well relative to the number of game spots that they have. And I think that's worth considering from CrossFit's perspective when deciding what to do in years coming forward.
So, yeah, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of adding extra pressure to athletes, whereas hey, if you're representing your country or region, so if you guys blow it at the games this year, we're just going to take another spot away from you. It'll be worse for you to compete next year. But there's an insidiousness to that I really appreciate.
So then how do we keep moving the sport forward? Because it's hard to know what exactly that means. When is CrossFit's ultimate goal just to find the one fittest man and female athlete, and everybody else is just part of the entertainment side for fans? Or what are we looking for if you look ahead to 5 years at the CrossFit Games? Do you think that it becomes the actual fittest 40 men and women?
Well, I'll say this, the one thing that CrossFit has always stood by is that their test has found the fittest person, male and female, every year. And that's the only claim they're making. And if that's the only claim they're making, then I do think that that's happening. It does, people like Tia Clair-Toomey, Justin Medeiros, Matt Fraser, Katrin David's daughter, when she was winning, they're going to make it through in any format. They're that good once you get to that level. And you even see the people that aren't winning. The Cara Saunders, the Annie Thor's daughters, the Brent Fikowski, the Pat Vellners, they find a way to get through in any format pretty much. I don't have to mention those 2 years anymore. But going forward from here, what it really feels like now is that the community wants to know more about more athletes and about more personalities in the space. And I think that CrossFit could adapt a little bit more of that mentality in the way they promote and cover and test the athletes that are choosing to make this their profession or pursuing this as a profession. I know from working behind the scenes in some of these areas that there is a trend that's moving in that direction, but it's an uphill battle because it's fighting against a decade plus of one mindset. So, right now we're in a very fluid time in a lot of different ways. We have a new programmer for the games this year. We have a little bit of a different leadership perspective, and we don't know what that's going to look like. I'm hopeful that there are going to be more and more opportunities to tell more stories and shed more light on more of the athletes that are in the field, and hopefully also to eventually get to the point where people aren't bored by watching heats 1 and 2 at the games, but that those are actually filled with athletes that are extremely relevant in specific workouts. And some of them have opportunities to make, big moves even day by day at the games, because we have a field full of 40 athletes, if that's the number we stay with, that's really competitive and that are pretty close to the fittest 40.
James, what's your bottom line?
I'm gonna equivocate slightly and just hit on one thing Brian said. What I am excited to see is more and more rookies coming into the sport, and just the newer faces, and especially younger athletes. I think seeing the Tudor Magdas of the world lift an insane amount of weight. Guilherme Maheros is amazing on the women's side. The Emma Lawsons, the Sydney McLishans, Mal O'Briens. I think that side of the sport is really exciting for me, and probably just because I've been around a while, to see. Obviously, the old names and the consistent names are super exciting, but to see newer names, younger athletes coming in, to me signifies something very special and important about the growth of CrossFit. So I'm most excited to see that part of it. I do think the main goal of the test of the CrossFit season leading up to the games is to find the fittest man and the fittest woman and the fittest team. And I do think the games team has been successful at that across the years. But I think they take a slightly different look toward the structure of the season. And I know that's something, like I said earlier, they take into consideration is, how do we still find the fittest athletes to stand on the podium while still nurturing growth of the CrossFit community, affiliate community, athlete community, the open community as a whole. So I do believe they'll consider to take looks at, how do we add spots here, take away spots here, host a semifinal in this location, to try and continually grow the sport there, which may mean some athlete in Australia who is fitter than another athlete in Africa might not make it to the games. It'll probably still be more challenging in those areas, but I do think that's something to keep in mind. So I'm hopeful.
And Brian, what's your bottom line?
I would say the bottom line is, even though I don't think that we have the 40 fittest athletes at the field, I don't think that was the goal of the season this year. I still think the goal is to find the fittest, and there are a lot of athletes that are in conversation for that. Especially in the men's field. The women's field, we're in the midst of an era right now where Tia's in a world of her own. But if you look behind that, there are still 25 women in this games field that are extremely good with a ton of potential. I don't think that the games is going to be boring by any means. I think that it's a really, really good field. I actually think on the men's side, this is one of the best fields we've ever had. And so even though I'd like to see some maybe some different opportunities for conversations, at least about how to select the field going forward a little differently, we're still in a really good place. We still have a super competitive field, and it should be a really fun event at the games.
All right, Brian and James, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.